Welcome back to Chessbox Worldwide. Tonight we shall be diving into a game which was played during the 2025 Cracking Series International Chess Challenge Open Section Round 6. This took place in Botswana between the current Malawi number 1 FIDE master Mwale Joseph, Zambia's current number 4 IM Bwalya Gillan. This is the second encounter this year in an international tournament, where the previous encounter happened during the 2025 Malawi Open ended in a draw. So this will decide the winner of the Cracking Series. Both players have won many tournaments around Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the center of African chess. In the white pieces, FM Mwale Joseph went on and played knight f3, and we see knight c6, e4, e5, and in this position he went on and played d4, the Scotch game. And after e takes d4, bishop c4 can come in, takes us to the Scotch gambit, but however he went on and played knight takes d4. IM Bwalya Gillan played knight comes into f6, but however also queen h4 can be considered. For example, in case of queen h4, we can anticipate moves like knight coming into c3, defending the pawn which is on e4, and after bishop b4, pinning down the knight against the king, and the queen is ready to take the pawn which is on e4, bishop e2, just sacrificing the pawn. And in case of knight f6, we just go ahead and play short castling. If black becomes greedy and plays bishop takes c3, play super aggressive move knight f5, hitting on the queen and also attacking the pawn which is on g7 and giving up the pawn on e4. In case of queen takes e4, then we play bishop d3. Now in this position, we are attacking the queen and also at the same time preparing to win the bishop. And in case of queen g4, trying to protect the pawn on g7, then we play f3, which is very aggressive. If black wants to be greedy to defend the bishop and they play bishop d4, then we just go ahead and play king h1. And I can tell you, the queen which is on g4 has nowhere to go and it's trapped. Let's go back. After knight takes d4, IM Bwalya Gillan played knight f6, attacking the pawn which is on e4. Then we see knight takes c6, pawn takes c6, capturing towards the center. Knight c3 is the move which is highly played. Joseph played pawn e5. But for example, in case of knight c3, then we could anticipate moves like bishop b4, pinning down the knight and preparing to win the pawn which is on e4. And after bishop d3, defending the pawn, short castling from white. And after d5 is still equal and very easy to play. Let's go back. After b takes c6, Joseph played e5, hitting on the knight, queen e7, queen e2, knight d5 was played. Remember, the pawn was attacking the knight. c4, bishop s6, pinning down the pawn against the queen is the move which is highly played majority of the games. The problem with this move is that the bishop on s6 becomes very passive throughout the whole game. For example, in case of bishop s6, then we could see b3, and after g6, opening up for the black bishop to sit on g7, g3, bishop g7, bishop b2, defending the pawn, short castling, and also bishop g2 prepared to go for short castling. And in case of rook coming into e8, pawn f4 can be anticipated. But however, after pawn c4, IM Bwalya Gillan played knight b6, hitting on the pawn which is on c4. In this position, Joseph went on and played pawn b3, but however, knight c3 was a very strong move in this position. For example, after knight c3, you could see bishop s6. Now you see that the knight and the bishop on s6 are attacking the pawn. Queen e4, moving away from the pin of the bishop. Remember now, this pawn is now guarded by two pieces. The bishop and the queen are guarding the pawn. So f6 could be played, hit on the pawn in the center. And in this position, c5 could be played, attacking the knight. And after bishop takes f1, rook takes f1, queen takes c5, 6 check, f7, bishop e3, hitting on the queen, queen d6, planning to go ahead and take the pawn and also stopping white from castling. Rook d1, attacking the queen, queen takes f6, bishop takes b6. Black wants to become very wise so that they can pin the queen against the king. I can tell you, this can be lost in the meantime. For example, after rook e8, white goes on and plays rook takes d7, bishop e7, bishop c5, and I can tell you, white is winning this one. Let's go back. He played b3, Bwalya Gillan, IM played bishop b7, trying to go ahead and push the pawn on c5 and opening up for the bishop to be very active on this diagonal. Bishop b2 is always anticipated, but however, Joseph played bishop a3, hitting on the queen, and after c5 we see that now the bishop is very active on this diagonal. Knight c3, developing the piece. Gillan played d6, but however long castling should have been considered, and after long castling we could see rook e8 hitting on the pawn which is on e5. But however after knight c3 he played d6, and in this position Joseph first of all played e takes d6, and after queen takes e2, bishop takes e2, bishop takes d6. We see short castling. S6 should have been considered to prevent the knight to intrude on b5. For example, S6 should have been played, and after bishop g4, trying to stop the king from castling alongside, then short castling should have been played. But however, after short castling, Gillan went on automatically and played short castling, and now Joseph played knight b5, trying to create a weakness. In this position, bishop e5 should have been considered, keeping an eye on the pawn which is on c7 and also attacking the rook which is on a1. For example, after bishop e5 we could see bishop takes c5, and after rook comes into e8, rook d1, s6 hitting on the knight, knight a3, bishop takes h2, the king takes h2, rook takes e2, and knight comes to b1, rook takes a2, rook fe1. Practically black will be well. But after knight b5 he played s6, and in this position knight takes d6, and after c takes d6, now d6 is a weakness, and indeed Joseph went on to attack it instantly. He played rook d1, attacking the pawn on d6, and after rook d8 we see rook d2, planning to go ahead and pile the rooks to attack the pawn which is on d6, rook d7, and after rook d1 Bwalya Gillan went on and played rook fd8, which was an inaccuracy. In this position he was supposed to play rook comes into e7. After rook e7, in case rook takes pawn on d6, then rook takes the bishop on e2, bishop f1, knight c8, defending the pawn, and now b4, c takes b4, bishop takes b4, putting all the pieces to attack the pawn on d6, bishop c6, and after f3, rook c7, king f2, h5, rook b2. At least black will have a playable game. But after rook d1 he played rook d8, and in this position Joseph went on and played h3, but however he was winning the game on the spot by playing bishop comes in on g4. For example, after bishop g4 we could see rook comes into e7, h4, trying to open up a running square for the king just in case, h5, and after bishop comes into h3, knight c8, bishop takes c5. Remember the two rooks have pinned down the rook which is on d8, and after rook d8, bishop b4, f6, and after f3, king f7. I can tell you that white will be winning this game in a few moves. But after rook d8 he played h3, g6 should have been considered, followed by bishop b2. But however, knight c8, which blunders a full game. For example, after bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5, in this position Gillan went on and designed the game in anticipation of the following variation. In case of rook e7, then we could see bishop comes into e3, and after rook d8, f4, you can see that white has 3 pawns on the queen side and black has only 2 and has the bishop pair. White has a positional dominancy against black, and I can tell you it's just a matter of time to win the game. Joseph Mwale went on to win on the game and also win the tournament. Thank you so much, and I wish you the best of luck in your games.